She refused his money, so he bought her brother's future instead. Daisy wanted nothing from the Mafia. Not the diner, not the cash, not protection, not a thank you wrapped in blood. Then she arrived at Sterling Care and found her brother Leo moved into a luxury suite. His surgeries, therapy, and medical bills paid for 2 years in advance. Beside his bed were white roses and one note from Alessandro. A debt isn't settled until I say it is. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? It is 2:43 in the morning on a dreary Tuesday, and police sirens paint a tragic blur across the wet diner glass. Here we find Daisy Gallagher, practically a ghost, pouring cheap coffee to chip away at debts she never chose. But you and I both know how cruel fate can be. Sometimes playing it entirely safe is precisely what places you in the crosshairs. Out of the shadows, a bleeding syndicate boss stumbles into her quiet refuge, hunted by a corrupt badge. In pure panic, Daisy lies to the authorities to shield him. It is a terrifying mistake. By dawn, the cold truth sets in. He remembers her. The lesson here is harsh but real. When we try to hide from the world often breaks our door down, proving that true safety is just a fragile illusion we build for comfort. The interior of Higgins' diner is a portrait of urban decay. Picture a heavy atmosphere thick with stale grease, bitter coffee, and harsh lemon bleach. Daisy is only 24 years old, but the graveyard shift is a thief that steals youth without apology. Her hair is tied back in a messy knot, and her blue uniform bears the stain of a careless patron. You can almost feel the exhaustion radiating from her posture as she wipes her forehead, her tired eyes anchored to the clock. Just 3 more hours of this grueling routine before she can catch a bus, rest briefly, and visit her younger brother Leo at his care facility. Her struggle reveals a quiet truth about human devotion. When we truly love someone, we gladly trade our own comfort for their survival, carrying the heaviest burdens, just to make sure they see tomorrow. She is trying to empty an ocean of medical bills from her brother's accident with a cracked teacup. It is an impossible battle, yet it remains the only fight she has left to wage. The diner remains entirely empty, wrapped in the loud rhythm of heavy rain against the glass and the constant hum of aging refrigerators. Daisy is drifting in thought, mechanically polishing a chipped mug, when the front door chime violently fractures the quiet. A sudden rush of freezing wind tears through the room, scattering loose napkins across the floor. She looks up, and her rehearsed greeting dies completely in her throat. The figure who steps inside clearly does not belong in a forgotten place like this. It is a sharp reminder of how life actually works. Trouble rarely waits for us to be ready. It usually kicks the door down, just when we are already fighting simply to keep our heads above water. This man appears carved from the most unforgiving stone. He is a massive figure, carrying a terrifyingly silent energy that entirely defies the raging storm outside. He wears a tailored charcoal suit that likely costs more than Daisy earns in 5 grueling years of shifts. But it is not the display of extreme wealth or his sharp features that causes her blood to run cold. It is his rigid, broken posture. He leans heavily against the metal doorframe, his left hand pressing a ruined white handkerchief tight against his ribs. Stick with me, because this is where the dynamic shifts. This moment teaches a stark lesson about our fragile shared mortality. No matter how much wealth you hoard or how much fear you command, every single one of us bleeds the exact same shade of red when the consequences of our actions finally catch up to us. The white fabric is ruined, completely soaked in thick, dark blood. With every ragged breath the man takes, a fresh surge slips past his fingers, dripping onto the cheap tiles Daisy just finished scrubbing. He locks his eyes on hers and demands coffee. His voice is a low, rough growl, colored by an Italian accent and heavy with undeniable authority. Daisy remains frozen behind the counter, caught like a deer in headlights. Every instinct screams at her to hit the silent alarm under the register, fully aware that armed men, bleeding in diners, bring nothing but absolute destruction. She barely stammers out that he needs an ambulance. It is a profound lesson about trusting the warnings our minds give us. When our gut tells us to run, we must listen. Ignoring the alarm bells is how we step willingly into nightmares that change the course of our lives forever. He locks his cold eyes onto hers, and the sheer gravity of his stare pins her to the floor. It is the unblinking gaze of an apex predator. There is not a trace of panic in his expression, only a calculating chill, even as his life drains away onto his expensive shoes. He drops his voice to a dangerous whisper, instructing her to forget the police and the medics, and to simply pour the coffee. Daisy swallows hard, recognizing the danger. It is the exact same hollow look the loan sharks had when they cornered her father so many years ago. It is the look of a man who deals exclusively in fatal ultimatums, never in options. It reminds us that true bravery is not always a loud act of defiance. Sometimes, the absolute smartest form of self-defense is staying quiet, reading the room, and doing whatever is necessary to survive the immediate threat. Watch how the tension builds here. The wounded giant drags himself toward the counter, every single step clearly costing him immense physical agony. He collapses onto a cheap vinyl stool, his face pale and covered in a cold sweat. But as his heavy coat shifts, Daisy catches a horrifying glimpse of a matte black pistol, resting tightly in his shoulder holster. Her heart hammers wildly against her ribs. She manages to slide a hot mug across the counter, her hands trembling visibly. He barely blinks in response. Using a hand completely coated in his own blood, he slowly unhooks his incredibly expensive watch and sets it firmly on the counter, claiming his space. It is a fascinating display of sheer human willpower. Even when we are deeply wounded, projecting absolute confidence and refusing to show fear can be the very shield that keeps our enemies at bay. He meets her terrified gaze and calmly establishes the rules. He will drink his coffee, and she will pretend the night is completely ordinary. If anyone asks, he has been sitting there eating cherry pie for an hour. Daisy is paralyzed, her eyes darting to the horrific trail of blood ruining the floor. But we are about to uncover the real twist. He flashes a grim, pain-filled smile and reveals a chilling truth. It was the police who shot him. Before Daisy can even process the weight of that statement, the diner is bathed in blinding light. Red and blue strobes flood the room as a cruiser screeches into the wet parking lot outside. Instantly, the wounded man transforms. It is a sobering reflection on trust in our society. Sometimes the very institutions built to protect us are corrupted, reminding us that we must always rely on our own moral compass. Any trace of exhaustion he displayed vanishes in an instant. It is entirely replaced by a cold, sharpened instinct for survival. His blood-stained hand drops deliberately to the grip of his weapon. He no longer sees the diner or the terrified waitress. His focus is entirely consumed by the glass door. We can clearly see the violent calculation in his eyes. He is fully prepared to take lives or lose his own right there on the linoleum floor. He barks an order for her to stay down, his muscles coiled tight as a spring. Daisy risks a glance through the rain-streaked window, and a sick feeling settles in her stomach. Two imposing figures step out of an unmarked car into the bitter storm. It is a powerful observation on the nature of conflict. A cornered predator who stops running and decides to stand its ground is always at its absolute most dangerous. The harsh streetlights illuminate the lead figure, revealing Detective Harrison Miller. A cold wave of dread washes over Daisy. Miller is a known entity in these neighborhoods, operating more like a ruthless shark than a public servant. He is deeply corrupt, known for extorting local businesses and acting as an enforcer for organized crime. If Miller is the one hunting this wounded man, he is not carrying handcuffs. He is arriving to execute a hit. Daisy realizes with horrifying clarity that if gunfire erupts, she will just be collateral damage. A man like Miller would never leave a loose end breathing. Panic seizes her chest, but then a deeper, older survival instinct takes the wheel. It shows us how we must process terror. Fear is entirely useless if it paralyzes you. You must learn to burn that panic as fuel to force your way through the darkness. Daisy looks from the bleeding mobster to the front door, measuring the narrowing gap of time. She urgently whispers that Miller is not here for an arrest, warning him that the detective intends to bury them both. For a brief second, genuine surprise breaks through the man's stoic mask, and he orders her to escape through the back. But Daisy is already thinking 2 steps ahead. She quickly points out that the alley cameras would capture them instantly. Moving purely on adrenaline, she rushes from behind the counter. Why risk everything for a dangerous criminal? Her mind is entirely fixed on her brother Leo. If she perishes here, he is left completely alone. It proves a beautiful, resilient truth about the human heart. Having a profound purpose, someone else who desperately needs you, will drive you to acts of courage you never knew you possessed. She grabs his uninjured arm, finding the man feels like solid iron beneath his ruined coat, and demands that he move immediately. He hesitates, his dark eyes searching hers for any sign of betrayal, before letting out a low groan and forcing himself off the seat. Daisy practically hauls the massive figure behind the counter, pushing him low to the ground. Then, she makes a desperate, brilliant choice. She grabs a damp mop and frantically scrubs the soapy water across the violent trail of blood, turning it into a faded pink smear on the white tiles. It is far from perfect, but it obscures the obvious path. She shoves him toward the heavy metal door of the storage room. It is a vital lesson for any crisis. When everything is falling apart, perfection becomes the enemy of progress. You simply have to act quickly, embrace the messy reality, and fight to survive. Let us step into this suffocating darkness together. Shall we? Picture a pitch-black pantry, heavy with the stench of raw onions and stale flour. Daisy breathes a warning to stay perfectly silent, knowing a single sound means their execution. But the man she is hiding in the shadows is no victim. He snarls a promise that if she betrays him, he will end her before the detective outside even gets the chance. She slams the heavy metal door, sealing a ticking time bomb inside a makeshift vault. Wiping away the blood, she grabs a coffee pot just as the diner door violently bursts open. Detective Harrison Miller steps into the harsh light, wrapped in a filthy trench coat, his cruel eyes darting around like a starved predator. The lesson here is unavoidable. The demons we lock in our own dark rooms are always far deadlier than the wolves scratching at the front door. The nightmare deepens as a trembling rookie steps in behind the corrupted detective, gripping his service belt like a terrified child, holding a shield. Miller abandons any pretense of public servitude. His rain-soaked boots squeal against the cheap linoleum, a deliberate, agonizing sound as he stalks the room for any trace of guilt. Daisy throws a mental switch, burying her panic behind the empty smile of a late-night waitress. She pours a steaming mug with incredibly steady hands, even as her pulse batters against her own ribs. Miller completely ignores the drink. He invades her space, leaning over the counter with the suffocating smell of wet wool and stale tobacco. It forces us to confront a harsh reality about human corruption. The absolute worst monsters do not lurk in the shadows. They stand boldly in the light, cloaked in the authority of a silver badge. Miller tightens the psychological vice, demanding to know who has passed through these doors. Daisy plays her part beautifully, offering a bored shrug and claiming it has just been her, and the quiet night since midnight. But a veteran predator is rarely thrown off the scent. His cold eyes drop to the freshly mopped tiles, locking onto a faint smear of pink near the center stool. His tone drops into a menacing hum as he asks why she is scrubbing floors in an empty room. Leaning into the exhausted worker routine, she forces a tired laugh and blames a random drunk, knowing her boss would steal her tips if the place was a mess. She survives this interrogation because of a fundamental truth of survival. You must build your psychological armor long before the enemy steps onto your battlefield. Still, Miller leaves his fingers drumming the cracked counter, unconvinced. The silence in that diner becomes a heavy, physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Miller pauses right in front of the narrow back hallway, the exact threshold, separating his violent authority from the bleeding crime lord in the dark. Resting a hand casually on his firearm, the detective mentions, They are hunting a wounded man in a ruined suit. Daisy refuses to let her body betray her mind. She aggressively scrubs a stain on the counter, dismissing him by saying, "This side of town only gets broke students and exhausted truck drivers." Unmoved, Miller snaps his fingers, sending his young partner to sweep the back rooms. Ice floods her veins as the heavy boots march past her. This moment teaches a critical lesson about facing absolute disaster. When the world demands your collapse, you plant your feet. Flinching is the only way you truly lose. Daisy grips the cracked edge of the counter with such force that her knuckles turn completely white. She can clearly see the violent tragedy waiting to unfold. If that nervous rookie swings open the heavy metal door, the cornered Mafia boss will unleash a hail of bullets, and Miller will gladly slaughter everyone left standing. Every second of waiting is psychological torture. She tracks the rookie's footsteps as he bangs through the restroom and rattles the small office. When he finally stops at the pantry, demanding to know what is inside, Daisy weaponizes her tone. She projects the bored irritation of an underpaid worker, yelling that it is just flour and that he has to yank the broken handle hard. We can take a vital piece of wisdom from her survival. When the entire world is burning to ash around you, a coldly calculated mind becomes your greatest possible shield. A loud metallic slam echoes down the hallway as the rookie forces the latch incorrectly, jamming the door exactly as Daisy manipulated him to do. He mutters about the broken handle, and Miller finally lets his thin patience snap. The veteran detective barks that a bleeding man hiding in a flower closet would have left a glaring trail, and now deciding they are wasting their time. The rookie clears the hall, but the predator lingers. Miller locks Daisy in a dead, hollow stare, leaning close enough to promise that if she is protecting someone, a docked paycheck will be the least of her suffering. Daisy just lowers her chin, playing the harmless, intimidated girl to absolute perfection. It reveals a brilliant, unwritten law of power dynamics. Sometimes, feeding an enemy the illusion of your own weakness is the most dominant move you can possibly make. Growling about chasing ghosts, the corrupted men finally step back out into the freezing downpour. Daisy tracks the glowing red tail lights of their cruiser until they dissolve into the storm, and only then does the adrenaline abandon her. She collapses heavily against the back counter, shoving a trembling hand over her mouth to muffle a desperate, breaking sob. She just gambled her life against a ruthless detective to harbor a syndicate killer. She forces herself to wait on that dirty floor for 5 agonizing minutes, ensuring they do not circle back to spring a trap. When she finally pushes herself up, her legs feel completely hollowed out. Look closely, and you will see a profound truth about human bravery. True courage is never the absence of fear. It is feeling absolutely terrified and still taking the exact steps required to survive the night. Daisy throws her entire body weight against the jammed metal door, dragging it open. Inside the black, the wounded boss is slumped over a massive sack of flour, his heavy pistol leveled directly at her chest. The second he realizes it is just the waitress, the weapon drops, and a long, ragged breath escapes his lungs. Stripped of adrenaline, the man looks like walking death, his face drained to the color of wet cement. She keeps her voice low, warning him that the police are gone but will inevitably return. He attempts to stand, but his ruined leg entirely betrays him. He collapses backward into the metal shelving, sending canned goods crashing across the floor in a loud, chaotic mess. Life has a brutal way of reminding us of a simple reality. No matter how high you build your emotional walls, a day always comes when you need another person to pull you up. You and I both know how the darkness strips away our masks. The fallen boss curses in rapid Italian, his pale hands clamped desperately over his bleeding side. Daisy knows her safest move is to walk away, but human empathy is a heavy anchor. She hauls his weight over her shoulder, dragging him toward a cheap plastic chair in the break room. By the time she returns with a dusty first aid kit, he has stripped away his ruined spoke jacket. Beneath the expensive silk, his torso is a brutal map of jagged, silver tissue. He has survived a lifetime of violent betrayals. Yet Daisy forces her eyes onto the fresh, ragged hole tearing through his flesh. The lesson here is quiet but profoundly true. You can read the entire unspoken tragedy of a person's life's course simply by studying the deep scars they so desperately try to keep hidden. The stranger forces out a grunt, claiming the bullet passed clean through, missing his vital organs. Daisy snaps right back, asking if getting shot suddenly earned him a medical degree. That biting sarcasm is nothing but a shield, her exhausted mind flipping over into a cold, mechanical survival state. He falls silent, letting his dark eyes burn intensely into hers. Without warning, she upends a heavy bottle of harsh antiseptic directly into the open flesh. The man refuses to give her a single scream, but his jaw clamps down so hard the tension echoes in the room. She frantically packs the raw, violent wound with rough gauze. Left with only diner supplies, she grabs a roll of silver duct tape to bind his flesh together. Life teaches us this raw truth. When destiny strips away your elegant choices, you survive by weaponizing whatever is right in front of you. He glances down at the crude silver duct tape, a faint trace of genuine respect roughing up his voice. Daisy cuts the thick adhesive, telling him it will hold just long enough for him to crawl back to whatever underground surgeon his syndicate uses. As she finally steps back, the suffocating reality of the room takes hold. She is standing inches from a lethal, apex predator. The tight air reeks of warm copper and expensive sandalwood. He tilts his head slightly and drops the heavy question, demanding to know why she saved him. Daisy fires back instantly, claiming she just did not want to be stuck mopping up his dead body. It brings us to a beautiful, tragic little lesson about human nature. Sometimes, the absolute safest way to protect a noble, bleeding heart is to convince the cruel world that you simply do not care about anything at all. She holds her ground with fierce defiance, swearing she does not make nearly enough money to scrub a syndicate corpse off the faded linoleum. The wounded man lets out a low, gravelly chuckle. It is a dark, hollow sound that sends a sudden, icy chill straight down her spine. Slowly, he forces his battered frame up, testing the limits of his violently abused body. Reaching deep into his coat, he produces a thick silver clip packed with $100 bills. He casually peels off a stack, some stained deep red with his own fresh blood, and tosses them onto the table to pay for her ruined mop. Daisy flares up, rejecting his corrupted cash and demanding he walk out into the rain forever. There is a harsh, necessary lesson woven into this exchange. Accepting a favor from a truly dangerous man is exactly like swallowing a rusted fishhook. You never, ever take the bait. Daisy begs him to vanish and pretend this bloody nightmare never happened. The wounded man slowly buttons his ruined shirt, limping toward the back exit. Right before pushing through the heavy door, he freezes. The flickering red glow of a neon sign bleeds across his face, carving violent shadows into his skin. His dark eyes lock onto her cheap name tag. Daisy Gallagher. He speaks her name out loud, rolling the letters with a terrifying elegance that balances between a sacred vow and a deadly threat. Men of his nature never forget a debt, he whispers, and he owes her his life. Then he steps out, swallowed entirely by the freezing storm. The tragic lesson here is simple. The absolute worst thing you can ever earn in this cold world is the eternal gratitude of a ruthless crime lord. Daisy stands alone in the silent break room, haunted by the violent echoes of the night. With trembling fingers, she quietly pockets those blood-stained $100 bills. Why would she take dirty money? Because her sick brother Leo desperately needs his medication to survive. This moment forces us to swallow a bitter life lesson. Pure morality is a luxury of the safe, but sheer survival becomes the only rule when someone you love is hanging by a thread. She spends the dark hours on her knees, desperately scrubbing away the physical trauma. By 6 a.m, the diner floors shine, reeking of harsh bleach rather than warm blood. The Chicago sun crawls into the sky, gray and entirely devoid of hope. Her sweaty manager Higgins barges in, instantly yelling at her about the chemical stench, completely blind to the brutal nightmare she just endured. Let us take a closer look at this together, shall we? You and I both understand the crushing weight of a thankless job. Daisy stands there, getting verbally torn apart by a cheapskate's boss who actually docks her meager pay just for using too much bleach. Her bones deeply ache from zero sleep. The horrific bloodbath from the night before blurs into a sickening fever dream. All she truly wants is to grab her worn purse and make sure her little brother is safe. Muttering a quiet surrender, she leaves Higgins obsessing over his cruel ledger. She steps out into the biting winter street, wrapping her thin jacket tightly around her shoulders as she drags her exhausted soul toward the bus stop. The quiet life lesson here is profound. Some days, simply finding the inner strength to walk away from the chaos is the greatest victory of all. She barely makes it down the sidewalk before a heavy tremor rattles the cracked pavement. Daisy turns around, her stomach plummeting into pure terror. Gliding smoothly into that crumbling diner parking lot are 4 pitch-black SUVs, their windows tinted like thick slabs of polished obsidian. The massive vehicles whip into a flawless semicircle, completely choking off every single exit. The morning traffic screeches to a dead halt. Pedestrians scatter, sprinting into nearby alleyways, because the streets intuitively know when true violence has arrived. The heavy car doors open in chilling, perfect synchronization. 12 imposing, utterly lethal figures step out onto the cold asphalt. The lesson of the street is painfully clear. When absolute, unchecked power arrives at your doorstep, the only smart move is to fade into the background and disappear. These men are not average street thugs. They are disciplined soldiers dressed in immaculate dark suits, moving with terrifying military precision. Stepping from the lead vehicle is an older man with silver hair and a brutal scar cutting through his brow. Daisy has never seen him before, yet he radiates the exact same suffocating authority as the bleeding man she patched up hours ago. He casually adjusts his silk tie, gives an icy nod, and the 12 silent enforcers march toward the diner doors like a professional execution squad. Daisy stands totally frozen in absolute dread as the crushing realization hits her. The wounded man was no random criminal. Life offers a very hard lesson here. Our choices always ripple outward, and sometimes a simple act of mercy pulls you directly into the violent crosshairs of a very dangerous underworld. The bleeding man was true Mafia royalty, and Daisy is just beginning to grasp the scale of her nightmare. She stands paralyzed on the cracked concrete, the bitter wind slicing right through her worn jacket. Her bus rolls up to the curb, the heavy air brakes hissing loudly as the doors swing open to offer a perfect escape. But she does not take a single step toward it. Here is a profoundly sobering life lesson. When a shadow that massive falls over your world, running away only delays the inevitable. Sometimes you just have to turn around and face the storm. She watches a terrifying masterclass in psychological warfare unfolding ahead. 2 enforcers remain trained by the idling vehicles, hands resting near concealed weapons, carefully scanning the rooftops. 4 more men fan out quickly, locking down every corner. The perimeter is flawlessly and irrevocably sealed. The silver-haired patriarch oozes a calm, lethal authority, strolling straight through the glass diner doors, with 6 enforcers shadowing his every move. Daisy watches, her chest heaving with frantic breaths. Every primal instinct begs her to board that bus and disappear forever. But if this syndicate is here to burn away loose ends, running only makes her the prey. Worse, Higgins keeps a detailed employee ledger in his office, containing her home address and the exact facility where her brother Leo sleeps. Thus, the hardest life lesson we ever learn is that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the conscious choice to run back into the fire for someone you love. Choking down her terror, she refuses to let them find her brother. Daisy spins around and sprints directly back toward the danger, her sneakers splashing heavily through the icy morning puddles. She creeps up to the plate glass window, pressing her trembling body against the freezing brick to spy inside. The diner is a ghost town, occupied only by Higgins and Sarah, the morning waitress. Poor Sarah is backed into a corner booth, quivering uncontrollably, gripping a coffee pot like a fragile shield. And Higgins? The petty local tyrant who constantly screams over cold fries? His arrogant soul has entirely abandoned his body. He is pinned against the cash register, his skin a chalky gray, staring in absolute terror at the disciplined army taking over his tiny empire. The silver-haired Don glides effortlessly to the center of the room. There is a profound life lesson in observing a bully. Those who shout the loudest to assert their petty power are always the very first to totally crumble when they finally come face to face with a real monster. A true predator never needs to raise his voice. He never yells or flashes a weapon like an amateur. He simply radiates a dark aura that slowly drains the oxygen from the room. Mr. Gregory Higgins, the Don purrs softly, his deep voice laced with a faint Italian accent. I am Domenico Moretti. I represent certain business interests. Higgins is sweating profusely, frantically wiping his hands on his apron. I pay my dues. Detective Miller gets his envelope every single month. Domenico offers a polite, bone-chilling smile. Detective Miller is currently indisposed. He suffered a sudden fatal heart attack in his car an hour ago. Outside, Daisy gasps. The corrupt cop is already dead. The universe teaches a very grim life lesson here. The debts of the wicked are always collected in blood, and dirty money can never buy a true stay of execution. You and I are going to unpack this terrifying moment together. That corrupt detective who bled the neighborhood dry, erased from existence before breakfast. The wounded king Daisy saved kept his dark promise. I am not here to collect an envelope, Mr. Higgins, Domenico murmurs, stepping up to the counter. A soldier slams a sleek black briefcase onto the cheap Formica. The metal locks snap open, echoing like a gunshot. Domenico spins it around, revealing impossibly thick stacks of crisp $100 bills. My employer wishes to purchase this establishment. The Don states plainly, dropping a flawless legal contract beside the mountain of money. Here is a vital life lesson to remember. When immense wealth and absolute violence walk into a room holding hands, the illusion of choice instantly disappears. You never negotiate with an earthquake. You simply try your best to survive it. Effective immediately. Here is $500,000, which is way more than this grease trap is actually worth. You sign the deed, take the bag, and catch a noon flight to Florida. You never show your face in Chicago again. Listen closely, because you and I both know this is not a negotiation. Higgins stares at the cash, his vision blurring against the empty eyes of the hitman boxing him in. It is a brutal death sentence, neatly dressed up as a corporate buyout. If he refuses, he leaves the diner in a black body bag. Trembling violently, he pulls a cheap pen from his apron and frantically scratches his name onto the dotted line. Excellent, Domenico whispers, his voice as smooth as cold silk. He snaps the briefcase shut with finality. Now get out. Remember this harsh truth. Sometimes, mere survival simply demands that you leave your pride completely behind. Higgins does not hesitate for a single second. He scrambles over the greasy counter, completely abandoning his coat, and vanishes into the alleyway. Domenico turns his terrifying, icy stare toward Sarah, who is practically hyperventilating in the corner. Where is the blonde from the night shift? He asks calmly. Sarah immediately breaks down. She left. Her shift is over. Please do not kill me. Domenico sighs, sounding deeply exhausted by the theatrics. Nobody is hurting you. Get out. We are closed. She sprints away, sobbing into the freezing air. Outside, hidden in the shadows, Daisy watches everything unfold. She knows that if these lethal men hunt her on the open streets, she is already dead. Instead of running, she takes a heavy breath, squares her exhausted shoulders, and walks right through the front doors. The hardest lesson we learn in the dark is that running from your fear only makes it chase you faster. Let's step into this tense moment together. The second that brass entry bell rings, 6 pairs of hollow eyes snap directly toward her. Rough hands instinctively drift toward the hidden steel inside their coats, but Domenico merely raises one quiet finger. Instantly, the ruthless hitmen freeze, like disciplined hounds. The older man turns slowly, taking in her worn jacket and the undeniable fire burning in her eyes. "Daisy Gallagher, I presume," he murmurs gently. Her heart hammers against her ribs as she stammers out her innocence, swearing she just pours coffee and never spoke to the police. Domenico simply offers a soft, grandfatherly chuckle. It is a profound reminder for all of us. True, terrifying power never actually needs to raise its voice to demand your absolute attention. "You completely misunderstand," Domenico says, his smile carrying an unsettling warmth. "We are not here to silence you. We are here to say thank you." Sweeping an elegant hand across the room, he announces that on behalf of Don Alessandro Rossi, the diner now belongs to her. Daisy turns to solid ice. That name echoes through her mind like a funeral bell. This is the untouchable phantom who rules the city. Just last night, she shoved that bleeding god into a filthy pantry and taped up his wounds. "Mine," she whispers, staring at the grease-stained floor she spent years scrubbing. It shows us how quickly fate can pivot. A simple act of unexpected compassion can completely rewrite the entire trajectory of your life, whether you are prepared for the consequences or not. Domenico checks an invisible watch, stating the deed will be in her name by 5. He casually mentions contractors are ready to gut the interior, adding that Don Rossi insists loyalty must be rewarded beyond measure. But instead of falling to her knees in gratitude, a sudden, blinding rage slices right through Daisy's terror. She knows the cold reality. All the money in the world means nothing if it cannot fix the one thing that is truly broken in your life. Her thoughts drift immediately to her little brother Leo, lying helpless in a depressing hospital bed. She works her fingers to the bone, just to keep his monitor beeping. A fresh coat of paint on a failing diner does not heal a shattered spine, and it certainly does not save the only family she has left. The memory of a corrupt officer leaning over her counter flashes in her mind. Daisy refuses to become another shiny pawn in a Mafia kingpin's twisted game. "No," she says, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. Domenico freezes. His groomed eyebrow twitches upward in disbelief. Behind him, a hulking enforcer shifts his weight, utterly confused. Nobody on this earth says no to the Rossi syndicate. When Domenico asks her to repeat herself, his polite veneer slips, revealing cold steel. But Daisy holds her ground, stating she does not want his dirty money. She saved a man because he was bleeding, nothing more. It teaches a vital lesson about inner strength. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is refuse a beautiful gift that comes locked inside a gilded cage. Daisy looks this terrifying underworld figure dead in the eye, making it clear she will never belong to the mob. Domenico stares back in quiet fascination. The Don warned him. This girl was a fierce spark in a pitch-black city, and now he witnesses that blazing fire firsthand. She tells him the debt is fully settled. He survived, she survived, and that is where the story ends. Spinning on her worn-out heels, she marches directly out the glass doors, fully bracing for the deafening crack of a bullet. But the shot never breaks the silence. She boards the early transit and leaves that life behind without a single backward glance. It is a profound realization to accept in our own lives. Sometimes the strongest armor you can wear against the darkness is simply choosing to walk away. Let us look at this closely, because you and I both know the underworld never just lets people walk away. Daisy spends 3 agonizing hours in her cramped apartment, pacing the carpet, waiting for men in suits to kick down her door. By late morning, the adrenaline drains out, leaving her nauseous. She forces herself to wash up and head straight to the medical clinic. It is a bleak, cinder block building that smells of bleach and quiet despair. It is far from beautiful, but it is the only place treating her brother on her meager wages. She steps up to the desk, desperately clutching her frayed checkbook. True devotion is not found in grand gestures. Real love is dragging yourself forward for the people you cherish, even when your own soul is completely exhausted and terrified. The crushing monthly bill is due today. It is a massive sum she barely cobbled together from loose diner tips and the blood-stained cash the Don left behind. Her stomach twists at the thought of using that tainted Mafia money. but her brother's survival demands the ultimate sacrifice. She approaches the tired nurse behind the scratched plexiglass, asking to pay the balance for room 214. The nurse taps the keyboard, her eyes widening as she delivers a shocking blow. Leo is no longer in that room. The air completely leaves Daisy's lungs. The sterile hallway begins to spin as pure panic takes hold. Did the syndicate take him as twisted revenge? When the ground falls out from under you, always brace yourself. Life has a cruel habit of delivering deep cuts when you think you are safe. Seeing the color drain from Daisy's face, the nurse hurries to stop her panic. Her brother is perfectly fine. He was transferred to the top floor, to the ultra-private luxury suites reserved for the city's elite. Daisy stands frozen, her mind violently short-circuiting. That wing costs thousands of dollars a week. The nurse points to the monitor, revealing an impossible truth. A massive wire transfer cleared at 8 in the morning. The suffocating medical debt is wiped clean. Every past surgery and the new luxury suite are paid in full. It is a terrifying, calculated display of endless power. A heavy truth to swallow in life is this: when a dangerous stranger hands you a miracle wrapped in gold, you can be absolutely certain there is a heavy chain permanently attached to it. Daisy grips the counter, her voice barely a whisper as she asks who paid the bill. The nurse offers a sweet smile, playfully calling the anonymous donor a guardian angel. But you and I know the dark reality. Daisy does not feel blessed. She feels like a helpless animal stepping onto a hidden steel trap. She rides the silent elevator to the top floor, her boots sinking into plush carpets that smell of lavender instead of harsh chemicals. Pushing open the heavy mahogany door, the sprawling room takes her breath away. Her young brother rests in a high-tech bed, looking more peaceful than he has in years. Always listen to the quiet warnings in your own soul. When sudden salvation feels entirely too flawless, you can bet the devil is usually waiting patiently in the shadows. Resting gracefully on the bedside table is a crystal vase holding 24 pure white roses. Leo beams at her, looking more vibrant than he has in months. He excitedly praises the smiling nurses and the gourmet food, completely oblivious to the invisible snare closing tightly around them. Daisy forces a gentle smile, choking back terrified tears as she kisses his warm forehead. Then, her haunted eyes lock onto those immaculate flowers. Nestled deep inside, the fragile petals is a thick midnight black envelope, heavy with unsaid threats. Her hands tremble violently as she reaches out, cracking the dark wax seal open. It is a brutal reminder of how the world truly works. Every beautiful, unearned luxury carries a hidden cost, and the collector knocks when you are at your most vulnerable. The ink on the heavy card is sharp and ruthlessly elegant. The message is painfully clear. A debt is only settled when he decides it is settled, and he will be collecting his little bird tonight. It is signed with 2 simple letters. Daisy crushes the expensive paper in her trembling fist. She thought she could just walk away, but Alessandro is an apex predator who understands the devastating power of leverage. By saving her brother, he effectively purchased her soul. She is no longer a tired waitress trying to survive the night shift. She is hopelessly trapped in the center of the underworld's most inescapable web. We must always remember this tragic truth. Sometimes the tightest chains that bind us to the dark are forged directly from the very people we love the most. The hours before sunset feel like sand slipping through a shattered hourglass. Daisy retreats to her run-down apartment, the silence deafening after the hum of that billionaire hospital suite. Every creak of the floorboard sends a spike of raw panic into her chest. She runs through a dozen escape routes in her head, but the bitter truth remains. She cannot run. Alessandro made sure of that the second he paid for her brother's life. It is a brilliant, agonizing manipulation, a beautiful gift wrapped in solid iron chains. If she vanishes, Leo loses his lifeline, and the mob will hunt her down anyway. Look, you and I know the profound truth here. Love is undoubtedly our greatest anchor in life, but when the wrong person holds the chain, it quickly becomes the ultimate, inescapable trap. Daisy looks at her reflection in the cracked mirror, a fractured image of a woman drafted into a psychological war. She puts on a black dress usually reserved for funerals. Tonight, it functions as emotional armor, a calculated choice to give nothing away. She pulls her hair back and wipes her face clean, rejecting the role of a willing date. She is a hostage. At 7:30, a heavy knock rattles her door, smoothing her palms over the dark fabric. She peers through the peephole. It is not Alejandro waiting. Instead, she finds a man in a navy suit, his nose broken and his eyes devoid of life. There is a brutal truth we must carry with us. You must always prepare for the violent reality of the battlefield ahead, ignoring the polite illusions your enemy tries to construct. She opens the door, and the giant casually states his name is Carlo. He explains the boss sent him to bring her in. Daisy forces her chin upward. Her knees feel like crumbling ash, but she asks what happens if she refuses. Carlo does not blink. He delivers a chilling reality, noting the boss prefers polite invitations, but is fully prepared to use violent force. He suggests the quiet route for the sake of her innocent neighbors. This is a guarantee from an underworld built entirely on bloodshed. Daisy gives a hollow nod, grabs her coat, and locks the door on her normal life. The lesson here requires a quiet sort of wisdom. True courage is not always loud. Sometimes, bravery means recognizing when you are completely outmatched and playing the game to survive another day. Let us unpack the visual imagery together. Down on the pavement, a sleek armored car waits. Its tinted windows turn the vehicle into a rolling fortress against the night. Carlo opens the door, and Daisy slides into the soft leather interior. The air is heavy with the scent of expensive cedar and stale cigar smoke. When that heavy metal door shuts with a terrifying sound, the last connection to her ordinary life is severed. The drive becomes a blur of neon lights fading into the wealthy estates, where historic mansions hide the darkest sins of the city. The tragic reality is undeniable. Boundless wealth can build the most breathtaking fortresses, but those very same walls will often create the coldest, most inescapable prisons a person could ever experience. The vehicle approaches the iron gates of the manor, a Gothic estate brooding over the dark lake. This location is a legend in high society, designed to keep the working class firmly outside. Cameras track their movement as the gates swing open. The car glides up a cobblestone drive, parking at the grand entrance. When Daisy steps out into the biting night air, the crushing psychological weight of the estate presses against her lungs. Two armed men in dark suits flank the mahogany doors. They remain silent, merely stepping aside to let her walk into the belly of the beast. We must never forget this simple truth. No matter how magnificent the gates may appear, a gilded cage remains a cage, and a monster will always build a home designed to consume the innocent. The interior of the estate is visually stunning, yet the atmosphere feels entirely suffocating. Crystal chandeliers and priceless art decorate every corner. But do not let the luxury distract you. Every inch of this palace was purchased with ruthless violence. Daisy climbs the grand staircase, her cheap shoes sinking into plush rugs without a sound. At the top floor, heavy oak doors stand cracked open. Warm golden light bleeds into the hallway, accompanied by the weeping strings of a vintage classical record. She pushes the wood aside and steps directly into the den of the predator. There is a profound truth hidden in this imagery. True corruption is rarely hideous on the surface. It wraps itself in fine silk, hiding its deep moral decay behind a perfect mask of staggering wealth. The library is cavernous, warmed by a roaring fire in a massive stone hearth. Standing by the window, staring into the dark lake, is Alejandro. He has traded his bloody clothes for a crisp white shirt with rolled sleeves, exposing the dark ink of his tattoos. He slowly swirls a crystal glass of amber liquor. Even moving stiffly from his gunshot wound, the man radiates a terrifying, predatory grace. He does not turn around when she steps inside. His deep voice echoes off the towering shelves, praising her punctuality as a rare and valuable trait. The sound sends a sharp chill right down her spine. The ultimate lesson here is one of pure emotional survival. When you find yourself locked in a room with a dangerous wolf, you must never let the animal see your hands shaking. You and I can feel the psychological weight of this moment. Imagine being backed into a corner by a man who holds your life in his hands. Daisy stares at his broad back, her voice tight, insisting she had no real choice when she saved his life. Alejandro turns slowly. The firelight dances across his sharp face, locking onto hers with crushing intensity. He takes a sip of bourbon, his gaze dragging over her morning dress. He tells her there is always a choice. Closing the distance, he brings the heavy scent of sandalwood and danger. He reminds her she chose to hide his bleeding body. She chose to lie. The painful lesson here is profoundly clear. Every action is a deliberate choice, even when the world forces you to pick between two terrifying nightmares. We can observe the lethal tension radiating from his jaw. Raw, violent power is coiled tight under his calm exterior, but Daisy refuses to bow. Every instinct screams at her to run, yet she plants her feet and states that she never wanted his blood money paying for her brother. A terrifying flash of pure rage crosses his dark eyes. He leans in close, his voice a deadly rumble, warning her never to mistake his financial investments for charity. He calls her his little bird, but Daisy snaps right back. She is just a waitress trying to keep her family alive, and he is the one who dragged a syndicate war into her diner. The lesson here is written in her defiant response. Sometimes, looking the devil in the eye and standing your ground is the only way to keep your soul intact. Daisy is psychologically unraveling by the second. She begs him to let her walk away, pleading that his secret is perfectly safe. Then, the unthinkable happens. Alejandro reaches out. His scarred hand gently catches a stray curl and tucks it softly behind her ear. That tender physical contact is paralyzing, coming from a man who ends human lives with a single phone call. Daisy turns to ice. He drops his voice to an intimate whisper and completely shatters her reality. He tells her the dirty detective did not act alone. Daisy steps back, begging him to explain further. Alejandro just turns away and walks back to his heavy oak desk. We must examine this behavior carefully. The people who appear the most ruthless always have a calculated, hidden motive behind every gentle action they take. The entire dynamic shifts instantly. He tosses a thick folder onto the polished wood and grainy surveillance photos spill across the desk. Daisy inches closer and her breathing stops. There are photographs of her diner, images of her waiting alone for the night bus, and a picture of her walking into the hospital just hours ago. Alejandro turns to absolute eighths. He explains the corrupt cop was merely a hound on a leash for the Falcone family. Lorenzo Falcone has been hunting for his territory, making the assassination a total setup. All the color drains from Daisy's face as the reality sets in. It proves a highly terrifying point about human awareness. Ignorance truly is bliss, because discovering you are being actively hunted by a ruthless crime syndicate is a waking nightmare. Alejandro slowly breaks down the agonizing reality of her new existence. Leaning against his desk, he explains that the rival organization sent their own ghosts to investigate the failed hit. They know he bled in her diner. They know she was the only person working. And they know the cop left empty-handed. He picks up the photo of her at the hospital and delivers the devastating psychological blow. To the Falcones, she is no longer an innocent bystander. She is a dangerous loose end. By choosing to save a dying man, she accidentally walked right onto a bloody chessboard, and pawns are always sacrificed first. The lesson here is incredibly brutal but deeply necessary. Sometimes doing the morally righteous thing drags you straight into a vicious war you are completely unprepared to fight. Daisy grips the desk until her knuckles turn white. She asks the heavy question, wondering if they will kill her. Alejandro steps closer, his eyes holding a lethal sense of possession. He tells her the agonizing truth. They will not just kill her, they will drag her brother into the crossfire. That is why he moved the boy to a guarded hospital wing under a fake name. Daisy feels the room tilt. Her old life of late rent is dead, swallowed by a nightmare of crime families. She whispers that he ruined her life. Stick with me here, because you and I know the tragic irony of this moment. We complain about the mundane, unaware that a quiet routine is a fragile blessing. Always appreciate the boring days, because your world can shatter in a single heartbeat. She hurls the blame at him, her words heavy with despair. Alejandro does not flinch. He delivers a brutal reality check, his voice steady as stone. He is the sole reason she is still drawing breath. If she had surrendered him to that corrupt officer, rival syndicates would have burned her diner to ash with her inside. He steps closer, towering over her trembling frame. He admits he respects her fierce need for independence, but in this dark world, independence is a deadly illusion. Her voice fractures as she asks what he truly wants. Leaning in, his baritone drops to a commanding whisper. He wants her exactly where he can see her. The hard truth we must all learn is that pride acts as a beautiful armor, right up until it becomes the heavy weight that pulls you completely under the dark water. The proposition hangs heavy in the quiet room. He demands she move into his fortress estate, protected by armed guards 24 hours a day. Her role is simple. She must stand by his side at public events to convince his rivals she is his property. Daisy lets out a sharp, bitter laugh, asking if he expects her to play the obedient mistress. She uses his real name, throwing it at him like a jagged weapon. A slow, predatory smirk touches his lips. He whispers that she will be his guest, not a mistress, reminding her of the fire she used to outsmart a crooked officer. Life has a funny way of testing us. The moments where we feel the absolute weakest and most trapped are often the exact moments we prove how truly unbreakable our spirits really are. He calls her a rare spark in his violently dark world. Metal rings against wood as he slides a heavy platinum keycard across the mahogany desk. His tone shifts to cold authority, casually noting that her belongings have already been moved to the east wing of his mansion. He promises her brother will receive elite medical care, ensuring she will never struggle again. Daisy stares at the gleaming card as the walls begin closing in. She could fight, but a rival syndicate is already hunting her. Now, the devil himself is offering sanctuary. Her trembling fingers slowly reach out, dragging the card closer. Survival is a bitter pill to swallow. Sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to shake hands with the devil just to keep worse monsters away from your door. The platinum card feels like solid ice against her palm. Daisy lifts her chin, the fear in her eyes hardening into unbreakable resolve. The era of playing the victim is over. If she must survive this shadowy underworld, she will not be a passive pawn. She agrees to stand as his shield against the Falcone family, but then changes the rhythm. She has a condition. A flicker of shock crosses Alejandro's stoic face. Nobody negotiates with the boss. Daisy steps into his space, holding his dangerous gaze. If she is going to wear a target on her back, she refuses to remain helpless. He is going to teach her how to shoot. The lesson here is written in iron. If life ever forces you into a deadly arena, you must demand the exact weapons you need to fight your way back out. Let's look closely at the shift in atmosphere three weeks later. We are deep in the underground firing range, beneath his sprawling manor. The air smells of sharp gunpowder, cold concrete, and his cologne. Daisy has traded her diner uniform for the sleek clothes of a gilded cage. She stands at the line, hands wrapped tightly around a black Glock 19. His low baritone vibrates through her headset, warning her stance is too rigid. Before she can breathe, his solid chest presses against her back. His rough hands glide over hers, firmly correcting her grip. Growth always demands that we step into the uncomfortable. Sometimes, you have to let the person who intimidates you guide your hands until you finally learn how to stand your ground and protect yourself. The air between them is thick. His warm breath brushes her neck, sending a dangerous brushes her neck, down her spine that has nothing to do with fear. He speaks right into her ear, his voice a low rumble, telling her to lean into the steel. He warns her to never let the weapon control her. Daisy exhales and squeezes the trigger. The gunshot shatters the quiet, striking the target dead center. Alejandro murmurs soft praise and steps away, leaving a sudden chill where his heat just was. He notes how fast she learns. Daisy does not miss a beat. She drops a freezing reply, stating that survival is a brilliant motivator. She clears the chamber with smooth precision and turns to face him. True confidence is only born when we finally confront and master the exact things that used to paralyze us in the dark. Over these past weeks, the unspoken pull between them has become a suffocating weight. She was brought here as a captive alibi, but the boundaries of this manor are melting. His quiet possessiveness makes her pulse race, but the quiet days are officially over. Alejandro studies her with dark eyes, announcing that tonight is the ultimate test. They are walking into the fire at a lavish charity ball at the Palmer House Hilton. Chicago's corrupt elite will be watching, including the very man hunting her, Lorenzo Falcone. Daisy swallows the bitter fear burning in her throat. We can hide and build our defenses in the safety of the shadows all we want, but sooner or later, the music starts, and we are forced to step into the blinding spotlight, to look our biggest demons right in the eye. A tremor shakes Daisy's voice as she asks if the rival boss will take the bait. Alejandro retrieves a black velvet box. It snaps open, revealing a blinding diamond and sapphire choker. He explains that Falcone thinks he can win by destroying whatever belongs to the Rossi family. Alejandro steps close, the freezing stones settling against her collarbone. His rough knuckles brush her warm skin as he fastens the clasp. He orders her to stay close, smile, and remember that she bows to no one. Hours later, Daisy steps from a bulletproof Maybach into the flash of cameras. The truth of this world is simple. When you are forced to walk into a room full of starving wolves, you must hold your head high and convince every single one of them that you are the one holding the leash. Picture the scene in your mind. Daisy commands the room in a midnight blue silk gown. Heavy diamonds catch the frantic camera flashes. Alessandro steps to her side, his hand pressing firmly against her lower back, radiating cold authority. As they enter, the ballroom of Chicago's elite parts for them. Whispers ripple through the crowd as the notorious Don Rossi brings a woman into the light. For an hour, the grand illusion holds. Daisy plays the queen perfectly, offering calculated smiles to corrupt men. But peace is a fragile glass. The performance shatters when a panicked politician suddenly corners Alessandro near a towering ice sculpture, a gentle reminder for us all. No matter how perfect your armor appears, unexpected chaos is always waiting quietly in the shadows. The politician hisses about shipping permits, begging Alessandro for 5 desperate minutes alone. A muscle jumps in Alessandro's jaw. He orders Daisy not to move, assuring her his enforcer is watching. Daisy offers a confident nod, sipping her champagne. But the second Alessandro vanishes into a VIP room, her perfect mask slips. She stares at an oil painting, trying to quiet her frantic heart. Just as she finally catches her breath, a poisonous voice slithers against her ear. It mocks her, sneering that she is a long way from pouring cheap diner coffee. She turns to see a man in a crisp white tuxedo, stepping from behind a marble pillar. The cruelest truth in life is this: the exact moment you finally exhale and drop your guard is when the deadliest snakes slither out of the tall grass. The man is Lorenzo Falcone. With his icy eyes, he is exactly the monster they fear. 2 guards slide in, blocking Daisy from Lorenzo's sight, but she refuses to flinch. Channeling cold authority, she smoothly pretends she has no idea who he is. Lorenzo barks a cruel laugh, dismissing her as a stray dog. Then, he slips the blade right between her ribs. He casually asks how her brother, Leo, is doing in hospital room 501. The diamonds around Daisy's neck suddenly feel like a noose. Her blood turns to solid ice. Lorenzo leans in, sneering that Alessandro thought he could hide the boy. You and I must remember this heavy truth. When the devil wants to break your spirit, he will never aim for your chest. He will always pull the trigger on the people you love the most. The dreary diner is a distant memory. Lorenzo hits her with a sickening ultimatum. He whispers that his hitmen are entering the hospital right now, and her brother only survives if she leaves with him through the service elevators immediately. Lorenzo stares with a smug predator grin, fully expecting her to break down. He assumes this former waitress will cry, beg, and walk straight to her own execution. But here is the beautiful twist. Daisy has not been a fragile waitress since the night she scrubbed mob blood off her floor. Instead of panicking, she takes a slow, bothered-down sip of her sparkling champagne. Life teaches us to never assume someone is powerless just because of their humble background. Sometimes, the cornered rabbit is actually a ruthless predator in disguise. Let us examine the exact moment the prey decides to become the predator. Daisy holds Lorenzo's frozen gaze, but the terror he expects is entirely absent, replaced by a massive, intoxicating rush of pure adrenaline. She slides her hand into the high slit of her dress, her fingers finding the cold, heavy steel strap to her thigh. Our former diner waitress is no longer defenseless. Lowering her voice to a lethal, quiet whisper, a perfect mirror of her Mafia boss lover, she asks if he truly believes he is the first man to threaten her blood. Lorenzo's arrogant smirk fractures. Stepping directly into his breathing space, she exposes his fatal miscalculation regarding Alessandro Rossi. The lesson here is profound. When someone you assumed was weak suddenly invades your space with absolute authority, you have already lost the psychological war. She tells him, without a single tremor in her voice, that his grand strike was expected from the start. Watch how Lorenzo's untouchable aura completely crumbles, his face draining of color. He spits out that she is bluffing, a desperate liar, playing a dangerous game. But Daisy simply stares right through him, daring him to let his giant enforcer, Victor, make the call to verify. Victor dials the burner phone, and those dragging seconds become an agonizing psychological torture. Then, Victor's hardened face twists into pure, unfiltered horror. Shaking, he murmurs that Alessandro's right-hand man picked up the line. The hitmen are already in the ground. It brings us to a harsh but necessary lesson. Never attempt to dismantle a master strategist without first ensuring your own vulnerabilities are fiercely protected. Lorenzo loses his grip on reality and screams for his Yitzhak to seize her. But Daisy has abandoned the role of the victim. Moving with the cold instinct of a survivor, she lets her crystal glass slip, shattering loudly against the polished marble. In that same heartbeat, she draws the compact Glock 43. Before the massive enforcer can even clear his holster, Daisy levels her weapon and pulls the trigger. The gunshot is partially swallowed by the orchestra, but the physical destruction is absolute. She shatters his kneecap, sending him crashing down in a messy heap of agony as the wealthy guests erupt in screaming panic. It leaves us the street grabbed his shirt. It leaves us with the critical truth for life, never back. A seemingly harmless person into a corner, unless you are fully prepared for them to bare their teeth and strike back. Picture this scene with me, because the symbolism is striking. Lorenzo stares down the barrel of the Glock that Daisy has aimed directly at his heart. Her hands are absolutely steady. She is an ice queen draped in diamonds, calmly informing him that if he twitches, he takes a bullet. Lorenzo scrambles to maintain his tough exterior, sneering that a fragile waitress does not have the stomach for murder. Yet he is visibly terrified. Then, a low voice spills from the shadows of the ballroom. It simply says, "She does not have to." Alessandro Rossi emerges like a dark god of vengeance, weapon drawn, radiating a violent energy that sends the guests fleeing. The lesson here is as old as time itself. If you are arrogant enough to corner the queen, you must be fully prepared to face the absolute wrath of the king. The most poetic beat of this sequence, Alessandro does not waste a single glance on Lorenzo. His dark gaze is locked entirely on Daisy. He registers the smoking gun, the scattered glass, and the bleeding enforcer. There is no anger in his eyes. Instead, he looks profoundly proud. He steps to her side, lightly brushing her arm, before turning a dead stare toward the rival boss. His voice cuts through the room, stating he came for his queen, and this is checkmate. Lorenzo opens his mouth to beg, but you and I know the time for negotiation has expired. 2 rapid shots ring out, and the syndicate leader drops violently to the marble. The lesson is absolute. Make a reckless move against those in power, and you will be permanently removed from the board. Listen closely to the wailing sirens. In this underworld, they are nothing but a hollow soundtrack. Every uniform approaching the estate is already on Alessandro's payroll. The blood will be quietly scrubbed, the narrative rewritten. Watch as Alessandro turns to Daisy, his terrifying edge instantly melting away. He gently pries the trembling steel from her fingers, clicks the safety, and hides it from sight. Cupping her pale face in his hands, he asks if she is hurt, his voice a velvet hum revering her as his queen. Daisy stares at the lifeless rival, then meets the eyes of the man who dragged her into this dark abyss, only to crown her. It brings us to a complex truth. Finding a partner who stands with you in the darkest moments, quietly clearing away the wreckage, is a rare and powerful devotion. You and I must admit, the psychological transformation which we just witnessed is breathtaking. That innocent waitress from the diner is completely gone, buried under the rubble of this new life. In her place stands a ruthless queen forged in pure fire. She leans into Alessandro's touch, whispering that she is perfectly fine, declaring she is exactly where she belongs. She seals her dark fate without a single ounce of regret. Daisy proves that survival is not just about hiding from the monsters in the dark. Sometimes, it means looking the devil straight in the eye and learning to master his brutal game. The final lesson for tonight is clear. If you cannot escape the villains circling your life, you might as well take the throne and rule them all. Stick around, because this story is far from over.
Daisy's transformation becomes meaningful because she refuses to remain helpless. Once she realizes that the Falcone family may target her and Leo, she understands that fear alone will not save her. She accepts that the world around her has changed, but instead of becoming passive, she makes a condition. If she must become a target, Alessandro must teach her how to shoot. This is one of the strongest educational lessons in the story. Daisy does not ask to be protected like a fragile object. She asks to be trained. She wants skills, awareness, and the ability to defend herself. This marks the beginning of her psychological transformation from victim to participant. In life, survival often depends on preparation. People facing difficult situations, whether financial hardship, unsafe environments, toxic relationships, or sudden responsibility, cannot rely only on hope. They need knowledge, practice, and practical skills. Daisy's training in the firing range symbolizes Azar's a broader lesson. When danger enters your life, you must learn how to respond instead of only wishing it would disappear. Alessandro teaches her to control the weapon, but the deeper lesson is about controlling herself. She learns to breathe, focus, and act under pressure. Later, at the charity ball, this training saves her. When Lorenzo Falcone threatens Leo, Daisy does not collapse. She remembers what she has learned and responds with steady courage. The educational message is not that violence is desirable. Rather, it is that helplessness should not be romanticized. A person who is forced into danger deserves tools, training, and confidence. Daisy's strength grows because she stops asking only to be and begins preparing to save herself.